Hello. So this is my second experiment with OBS. I'm trying to get more used to this software. Hopefully everyone's hearing me. There's always sort of this awkward pause before I hit start streaming and when I actually hear the stream. So hopefully people are seeing something. I want to get more used to using OBS, more used to creating live content because
Hello. So this is my second.
it's getting a little bit frustrating always having to do actually cut videos whenever I want to do some minor content. And I wanted to just do a live stream to briefly go over content I've created recently, what I hope to do in upcoming content creation, perhaps to answer some questions from people who are just tuned in really late for an after work live stream. I turned on my super chats, and I've gotten my first super chat in my life from William Klueg, which was Merry Christmas. So thank you very much. I didn't even broadcast when this was sent. So today, I guess, if there's no questions or nothing people want me to talk about that comes from the chat, I think largely I'm going to go over a DarkMatter2525 video called The Theft of Our Values, which I have not actually seen. And then I'm going to follow that up with answering questions, talking about some of the stuff I've made, and I don't know. I have sort of a backup thing if people still want me to do this. I'm going to go over Noel Plum's response to my atheist quote-unquote call-out videos. Noel Plum's been a really great guy. He's responded to a lot of my videos. I'm never really sure how to respond to him. He always has this very extemporaneous method for talking about things, and I'm kind of at a loss of what to say. Usually it's just describing things sociologically, and there's not a lot of arguments there. So I think Noel Plum's a great YouTuber, but oftentimes I have a really hard time knowing how to respond to his video responses. So I always kind of put them off. So my thought is, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well just do it in a live stream and see how it turns out. So I'm just going to ask the chat before I begin. Is there anything else? Is there people hearing me? I can see chats. There's about 40 people watching now. Okay, I guess everything looks like it's working. So I suppose the first thing I just wanted to kind of go over, the reason why this starts with mea culpa, is that so I released a few things in the last several weeks that were kind of things that had been on my radar for a really, really, really long time. And so the first one was, a set of videos about atheism, where, I knew I was going to do some videos on atheism. People had asked me to respond to this being sort of a fairly large YouTube channel that's religious, that's Catholic. People wanted me to talk about atheism. And, I realized that there were a lot of people talking about skepticism and just generally people criticizing religion. And my intention was essentially to do a lot of live streams with big skeptics channels. So I did this sort of initial atheist call-out video talking about how, oh, well, people like Armored Skeptic and Amazing Atheist, they bash religion a lot, but they really nowhere to be found when it comes to live streams. And my intention was largely to do live streams, but after about a few weeks, it was really obvious that there was no intention to actually respond to this. Okay, so are people hearing me? It seems someone's a little bit quiet. Maybe I'll move my microphone up a little bit. But yeah, so the responses to there were very few responses to the initial atheist call out. And so I decided I just make a few videos talking about what my thoughts were on the subject of atheism and this whole not a belief type atheism. And indeed, my first video is sort of like what I always want to say to atheists in animated form, and it's called The Fatal Flaw of New Atheism. It's broadly based on a lecture I gave. That's the first video on this channel, called The Cult of Confidence. I gave it at a live lecture event at a Atheist Philosophical Society. And I followed that up with another video where I just responded in a very extemporaneous and frustrated way at sort of the response I gave with it's not a belief type atheist, and the other refusal of a lot of atheists to actually do live streams and discussions. So that content went up, so it really resulted in 2 videos. So immediately following that, and this is where the mea culpa comes in, I kind of came across this whole fiasco with Crowton T. This was really something.
And when I actually hear
a lot of people have been very frustrated with his attempt to sort of take down race realism, and of course, what it really amounts to, and maybe there is a good argument against this, but there is a good argument against race realism. I'll be quite frank. Kraut's not making it. What he is he's moving the goalposts back and back and back. And, that's fine for a scientific question, but after watching these videos, I got really frustrated. And I decided that I'd just make a joke about how he really wasn't answering the question. And this resulted in sort of me reposting off a lot of people who were also frustrated and writing a little script called Kraut and Truck. Now, subsequently, this was turned into a little animated video that went live on my channel that someone else animated, and that was voiced by Fritz Imperial and another content creator called Blackjack. And I posted it. It's like a little 2 or 5 minute video, and this, I posted it because I wrote it. But really, once I posted it, I really realized that it sort of violated a fundamental principle I have on my YouTube channel, which is that I always make sure that when I'm going to actually throw my 2 cents in on an issue, on a debatable issue, right, I should be ready to discuss that and debate it. And this is not true about race realism. I'm not an expert. I have no desire to debate it because, frankly, it does not intersect with my own ideology. All it is it's something that I kind of watch from afar, and I thought that, okay, well, this is sort of relevant, right? Crowton T is being deceptive. He's being he's being dishonest about how he's approaching this. I can make fun of it. I really shouldn't have, given that I'm not actually willing to debate this particular issue. So, what can you do? That was a mistake. Probably is not something I do in the future. And that being said, I stand by what I said in that video. So I see no reason to take the video down. So I'm leaving that cartoon up. So that basically kind of gets to my mea culpa. I really shouldn't have said that. But in the meantime, I'm just going to keep it up and let bygones be bygones. I stand by what I said. There's no reason to take it down. There's no inaccuracies. There's something that was unethical about saying it. And this sort of just created a little bit of a faux pas, but nothing really serious. So Alextris the Gaul says, "Are you from Seattle?" Yes, indeed. That's the city I currently live in. Yeah, by the way, as this stream goes on, this is completely extemporaneous, so just ask me questions. My main purpose in doing this is just to get used to answering things live without somebody talking to me, right? I sometimes have a difficulty with fielding questions extemporaneously or talking into a microphone and not hearing someone talk back to me. So I figure if I do these OBS streams in place of more minor response videos that I really don't have anything large to say about, it'll be better. Maybe I can cure myself of saying right. That's one of my verbal tics, right? I say right after everything. It irritates me every time I listen back to one of my own videos, and I've got to cure myself of that. Maybe I can also break my habit of peppering my talk with ums and uhs. So, it's a good practice to talk this way. I'm waiting a few minutes before I actually start the actual content. I think the original stream was started at 10 p.m. And at that point, I think we're going to go through one of the 2 videos I have slated. Maybe go over DarkMatter2525's The Theft of Our Values. So Uncle Rufus says, "Be agnostic about HBD. How disingenuous." Be agnostic about a question that I have absolutely no qualifications to answer for. That's not disingenuous, that's honest. I mean, why should a layperson? I mean, if you're going to be like Kraut and go like, okay, I'm going to take down this proposition, then going not enough evidence, while simultaneously calling people who are invested in it idiots. That's a little bit. That's not a little bit dishonest. That just is dishonest, right? If you're going to call someone an idiot for believing something or not believing in something, you've thrown your hat into the ring, and you better be able to ante up, right? But like I said before in my videos, we answer questions when we need to answer them. You'll be able to get an opinion about HBD or race realism or whatever the hell this question is called when someone actually tells me why, I need to answer it. I'm in possession of a philosophy that does not need to know this. Nothing about my philosophy is impacted by a question about genetics and its impact on IQ. Now, if you're a progressive who believes in some kind of ridiculous notion of egalitarianism, or if you're some, liberal who's a technocrat who thinks about meritocracy as some catch-all way to fix the problems of the world, then, that might be a serious problem for you. But I don't believe in egalitarianism, and I don't believe in meritocracy, and I believe in the universal dignity of man that's not tied to notions of IQ. So why would that even be something that I'd care about? Why would that, well, not care about, why would that be something that I need to answer? So Talbot says, when did you realize Christianity was the ancient Bolshevism alongside its Semitic sister religion, Islam, destroyed the longest running? Oh, come on. the paganism. Okay. Well, when did I realize that Christianity destroyed paganism? I think that I might answer this question. I don't know. I haven't actually watched DarkMatter2525's video, so maybe we'll answer. I watched a little bit of it, and I've heard from people. It sounds like it's really pagan in its perspective. What do you think about Miguel from your Marxist with Hats video? I think that's the person who is like, communism did do nothing wrong. Well, we can talk about history, I guess, but... Or I think he was the one saying that capitalism was responsible for the current poverty of Africa. I guess. I think capitalism's got tons of problems, but there's a big difference between a manufactured famine and not being able to solve the poverty of Africa. Okay. Well, we're coming up on the time. So I have, the way this is working is I'm going to play the video. I downloaded the video in a format, and I'm going to play it on my VLC player. I couldn't get YouTube to work setting up for this stream, so hopefully you'll be able to hear it. If you don't hear it, chat, please tell me. I might have to restart the stream, who knows. In which case, this is probably all going to get deleted, but hopefully this initial lead-in is going to be somewhat entertaining. Austrian economics works. Well, they work better than in communism, that's for sure. It's all relative, right? I think the Austrian economic theories have a lot of problems with them, but not the same way dialectic materialism has, especially in its command ideas of the economy. Is distributism a form of communism? No. Not at all. You could argue it's a form of socialism, but that's a little bit, then that's pretty different from communism. Do you think nationalism is beneficial to traditionalism? I could take it or leave it, I guess. Depends what your definition of nationalism is. I don't think this sort of purified nationalism you saw in the early 20th century is anything we should be trying to emulate. I think nationalism divorced from some kind of religious tradition is really bad news. This is why I highly speculate that, sort of the fascisms that you saw in the 30s, like, the Mussolini's fascism and Hitler's fascism. These were so much worse than the sort of moderate fascisms you saw in like Peronism or Franco's regimes in Spain. Those were just a lot more benign because I think they had the religious tradition much more central. That's not to say that these regimes were good. It's just to say that I think that if you're going to have some kind of concept of the nation, it can't be secular. It has to have something that mitigates it. It has to have something that pushes back against it. And Christianity has always held the two horses side by side, right? The secular authority and of the nation, and then the religion that governs it. So I guess I'm kind of moving out. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. I'm not sure I'm going to divide my screen real estate up, but let's try to keep an eye on the chat, and I'm going to start the video. So again, I have no idea what to expect. This is going to be really weird. I'm just going straight into this video, and I'm going to try to pause it every time I see something that is ridiculous, but this might be kind of weird. Okay. You'll tell me if there's you can't hear this, right?
The Christian legacy in America has historically manifested in attempts to usurp the very freedoms of which they ironically claim credit. Freedoms that didn't exist throughout the vast majority of Christian history. That's especially disconcerting during this day and age, when people seem to think that the answer to Islam is Christianity.
I mean, I'm just gonna pause it here. We're already in a pretty weird space, right? We're talking about freedom. It didn't exist during the vast, the longest time in Christendom, right? Okay, it didn't exist in the thousands of years before Christendom. This is sort of the. I got a little bit of this in my conversation on, was it Westward Thought stream. It's this idea that you can kind of like ahistorically superimpose our standards back onto Christianity, but not superimpose them back onto other ideologies that atheists typically want to draw from. I've never met an atheist who didn't say draw from concepts like Epicureanism and older philosophies like Pythagoras or the early pre-Socratics, but at the same time they didn't have a concept of freedom like we do right now. These are modern concepts that we're just sort of back casting into onto Christendom and then saying, oh look, they didn't do it. So we're already kind of in a weird place, but I'll keep on going because how long is this video? 40 minutes. Okay, I better start going, otherwise we're going to be here all night.
When in actuality, Christianity...
Oh, it's too loud. Do I drop the... I'm going to drop the volume a little bit. Hopefully that manifests itself on your side.
And Islam have shared some disturbing similarities, both being ancient Middle Eastern Abrahamic religions with long histories of authoritarianism, censorship, and brutality. While their DNA is identical, the main reason Christianity manifests differently today is because it has been declawed by a few hundred years of secularism. This should tell us that the answer to Islam is not more religion, but less. Too many people...
Okay, so here we sort of get the main thesis that Dark Matter has, right? So he wants to sort of, and I've seen this from Christopher Hitchens as well, Islam and Christianity are the same thing. The civilizations developed in similar ways, and therefore, we have to make sure that Christianity goes away entirely, because if we get rid of Christianity entirely, this is going to encourage some kind of sympathetic response in the Middle East where they're going to secularize Islam. But, although his understanding of history is totally ahistorical, and superimposes a modern standard, he doesn't seem to actually go to primary historical sources and ask if people thought the same way in Muslim societies as they did in Christian ones, right? If you went back to the 17th century and looked at Italian society and Turkish society, would it be very different? Well, Actually, it would be. If you read people like Machiavelli, and Machiavelli isn't even that negative to the Turks, but he very clearly lays out differences in how Islamic societies run. And in particular, he talks about how much more controlling and authoritarian they are, and he references it as a positive. So, this idea that, again, it's sort of this Hegelian notion of history. Progressives have essentially sanitized a look back on history, and they sort of, you can see how this is being sort of fit into a progressive narrative. So I'll go on a little bit further.
People mistakenly believe that religion stabilizes society. In fact, it has been our Christian leaders in the West who talk tough on terrorism, only to then prop up and arm Islamic theocratic regimes in the Middle East and Asia, which have destabilized their regions, thereby causing refugees and migrants to flee their highly religious countries into the stability and safety of secular countries.
Remember, kids, it's Christianity that's responsible for American foreign policy. But when, the Islamic immigrants are coming into those countries, they become secular countries, right? So, you see, when we have malfeasant foreign policy, it becomes Christian. When we have those societies themselves, the same ones that implemented the foreign policy, become victims of immigration wave, they suddenly become victims and therefore are secular, right?
We will never solve this problem if we keep giving the problem credit for being the solution. Religion is not the answer. That is why I feel I must set the record straight when a recent wave of populist voices have been duped into presenting Christianity as the solution to geopolitical and social problems, because they think it's the foundation of our culture, and that even atheists like myself are cultural Christians.
This is kind of an interesting question. I'm actually glad I'm reviewing this now. Hopefully I do a good job, considering I'm just doing it off the cuff first time. It does sort of get to the heart of my contention, right? So DarkMatter2525 must see that there's a problem. And I'm looking at these images and how he references immigration into secular societies, and he kind of sneers when he says that. He obviously understands that there is some kind of problem. Okay, so he doesn't think Christianity is the solution. What's the solution? Maybe he'll propose one. Again, I haven't seen this. I'm watching this off the cuff. But it's not clear to me. If you're wondering why, at the height of its economic and military power, Europe essentially just decided to commit cultural suicide, the first question you're going to be asking yourself is, why hasn't this happened any time in the past for Europe? No European society would have ever done what Angela Merkel did. So you have to answer me that, if religion is the problem, right, why did Christian Germany not do what Angela Merkel did to her own country and to Europe in general? Why are all these problems manifesting themselves right now? Because the hostility of Islam to the West, it's not a new thing. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he'll say something about this, but it's ahistorical to present hostility of Islam towards the West as being a product of American foreign policy. And American foreign policy apparently being the product of Christian pastors. So, who knows? I'm going to take a little bit of break here and see if anyone has any questions. Oh, it's more of the whole paganism thing. Yes, Christianity is only different from Islam because Europeans paganized it. Oh, it's more Christian heresy stuff. Well, we'll answer. I think these questions are just going to fall out from answering this particular video. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the pagan objections just came up as part of this video itself. I'm gonna check the volume's doing all right. I hope I'm not hearing any of this, so let's just play it.
I say it's the exact opposite. Christians are typically cultural secularists, all the way to the point that even their most sacred holy days are now homages to capitalism. And that's fine by this old atheist, but that leaves Jesus with far too many tables to overturn. So let's not overstate Christianity's true role in this ever-changing world of ours.
Cultural cultural secularists. I mean, now this is kind of the fundamental contradiction, because I am positive that if I got DarkMatter2525 onto one of my streams and I actually pressed him on his beliefs, he'd be going to the lack of belief thing in 5 seconds. In 5 seconds, he'd be claiming that atheism is nothing, it's just a lack of belief, he doesn't believe anything, he has no positive beliefs, he's just a skeptic, come on, what are you doing, why are you hassling me, I don't have any beliefs, I'm just the default, right? But now all of a sudden, we're hearing about how Christianity is co-opting cultural secularism. What's secularism? It can't just be a lack of something, because you can't co-opt a lack of something. So it's got to be something. Is it capitalism? Is he just going to own capitalism? Is this just going to be, is DarkMatter2525's philosophy just capitalism, the ideology, capitalism, the way of life? I really doubt it, right? I think he wants to make it. I don't know. Maybe he means that cultural secularism is just modernity. It's just consumption writ large, and I can kind of see that. I think that in that case, he really owns a lot of the problems of modernity if he's going to just say that secularism just means modernity. But again, just contradiction. I also noticed the title of this video, The Theft of Our Values. I mean, who is R in this case? Apparently it's the group of atheists or secularists. I mean, again, there goes my lack of belief, guys, right? He's definitely talking about a positive cultural group. But again, what's unifying this group? A lack of something? Well, a lack of something can't have values. A lack of something can't be co-opted. He's talking about a very particular group, a very particular set of people, a very particular set of ideas. Will we see what this actually means? Will we get hints of what he actually means when he talks about secularism as a positive force, or when he talks about our values with a capital O? I doubt it, but I'm just going to press forward.
To frame my point, I'm going to respond to David Wood's defibrillator argument for God. The reason I chose David is because his approach exemplifies what Christianity has done throughout history. From the current idea of what we call Western values to science itself, Christianity loves to take all the credit. But when you delve into the actual history, you find that at best, Christianity played only a part, and at worst, it was active opposition.
Now, this is always the thing, right? I mean, I don't doubt that this guy is going to give all the credit to any other ideology that's reigning during these technological achievements. For instance, I mean, whenever we see a huge explosion of culture and production and science, it's very often that we attribute these results to the culture at large, right? I mean, I think most people would consider the invention of most of the Chinese things that we like, noodles and fireworks and gunpowder. These would all be attributed to Chinese culture. Are they actually the result of abstract Chinese culture? Well, I mean, to a certain extent they are. But to say that they aren't is just to say that culture itself has it doesn't have any responsibility for the individual scientific achievements. I mean, it also sort of begs a question, and maybe we'll see an answer to this, is why did it occur in Europe, right? If Christianity is such a malfeasant force, why did this explosion of science and culture occur only in Europe and nowhere else in Buddhist countries, nowhere else in Islamic countries, nowhere else in African countries? Some of these countries even had these very rarefied atheistic kind of philosophies. I mean, if you consider lack of a deity to be your thing, why didn't the scientific revolution occur in Tibet? Well, we'll see. Oh, gotta hit that again.
In this case, David gives Christianity the credit for science, decrying what he calls atheist teenagers on Twitter who think they're champions of science. I think that's posturing, however, because I suspect David would not trouble himself with such a response to mere teenagers on Twitter.
I have no idea what he's talking about here, so I'm just going to let it go by.
Probable reason for his argument, I believe, is that modern scientists are typically atheists, and since scientists are the foremost experts on the mechanics of our universe, with far more information than their illustrious predecessors, it's very telling that most of them are not religious.
Notice he just refuted this before, right? I mean, I don't know what he's going to do. Oh, most scientists in the past were Christian. Oh, what's the explanation? I mean, I thought he just dispensed with that, saying that it was a pure coincidence and that they were just taking credit. I don't know. This is again, he's contradicting himself here. I don't even know if it's worth going into because it's not an argument, right? Most scientists are atheists or non-believers or agnostics. That's the culture of the modern university. And the culture of the modern university and the development of the modern university came from Christian culture, which is why if you go even 30 years back, most of them would have been some form of Christian.
David falls all the way back to the Copernican scientific revolution, beginning during the mid-16th century. This was the scientific revolution that birthed modern science and led to the Enlightenment, so it's quite a valuable thing indeed of which to claim ownership. He does this with the beginning of his defibrillator argument. Premise 1, no hypothesis in history has more scientific confirmation than theism. Premise 2, no hypothesis in history has more scientific disconfirmation than atheism. Conclusion, if we have respect for science, we must accept theism and reject atheism.
Okay, I'm going to pause here, although we're going pretty slowly. Again, I have no idea what he's talking. I guess this is some kind of argument that was going on in between DarkMatter2525 and some apologist. I mean, it has nothing to do with the historical argument, by the way. I mean, does atheism have evidence against it? I think it does. I don't know. What do you mean by atheism? If it's scientific materialism, I think there's a number of really powerful arguments against it. There is a lot of really good arguments for the existence of a deity, but most of them are logical arguments. Most of them are just a restatement of Thomas Aquinas' arguments for the existence of God. I think they largely remain unanswered to this day. Does it get you the Christian God? Well, not in isolation, no it doesn't, but I still haven't heard a good response to them. So I guess in that sense, I can see this being set up. I mean, it makes it sound here like, with his use of hypothesis, it makes it sound like he's saying that he's done some sort of empirical experiment, and in that case, I have no idea what he's talking about.
Notice that if we replace the words theism and atheism with their actual definitions, the premises fail to support the conclusion, for they'd be statements of confirmation of belief and disconfirmation of disbelief, and belief or disbelief have no bearing on the actual truth. So,
okay, I have no idea what that means. When you break down everything, any statement, you can put believe in any fact and turn a scientific proposition into I could do it this way. No hypothesis in history has more scientific confirmation than the belief that the Earth revolves around the sun. No hypothesis in history has more scientific disconfirmation than the disbelief that the Earth revolves around the sun. Oh wow, I just turned heliocentrism into a contest about belief. Just words, right? There's nothing to do with the actual facts or question we have going on right now.
He's using the words improperly. What he means to say is that science confirms the existence of God. The reason he thinks God has so much scientific confirmation is because he believes that everything we've ever learned from every scientific experiment ever conducted constitutes evidence for God. He does this by crediting Christianity with ownership of the very basis of science, as he describes thusly.
I'm not going to stop here. I mean, I feel like I'm watching some incredible straw man because this is an incredibly stupid argument. I really doubt this is the full statement of whoever he's arguing against in this.
1. The universe can be understood. 2. We can understand it. And 3. It is good to understand it. Since the scientific endeavor is predicated on these beliefs, every single scientific finding, no matter what it is evidence for God, according to David. This is because David thinks that not until Christianity did people believe that the universe could be understood, that we could understand it, or that it was good to understand it.
So this is an interesting point. I wonder, there could be some interesting things that come out of this question, right? So this gets at an argument for Christianity, both historically, and it's been used at some times as an argument for the existence of God, and that is that, independent of some metaphysical assumptions, we really can't save ourselves from pure skepticism, right? I've talked a little bit about this when I've talked about miracles. Right? Everything we know about the universe, and David Hume mentioned this too, it really relies on some understanding that what we're observing right now is intelligible. That there are laws that are in place, and those laws are repeatable, and the repeatability of laws can be organized in the human mind, and those objects can be subject to rationality. Now, I mean, this has been heavily debated over the course of human history. I think the first person to make really big strides on this were obviously the Greeks. People like Pythagoras. He thought he was one of the first people to really understand that, or postulate really, that the universe was really describable in purely logical terms, right? He believed at the base of everything there were just numbers and logic. And that's true, but the problem always was connecting that to actually observing the universe behave in these ways. And this was something that we didn't see for a really long time. So this is something that's been debated a lot, and this is a big Christianity essentially in the late Middle Ages, and maybe he'll talk a little bit about this, through Thomas Aquinas and through other thinkers, did embrace just these propositions, right? They embraced the idea that there were ordered laws that govern the universe, that we can understand those laws and we can understand their regularity. Now, this may seem like it's something that's just obvious to us currently, right? But what it really came down to for a lot of these Christian thinkers was that we had to be able to understand when something miraculous happened, right? So in order for a miracle to happen, we have to have an understanding of the ordinary operation of nature, and then we have to see that the ordinary operation is disrupted, which means that there has to be an ordinary operation of nature. It has to be discernible by humanity. That's his second thing. And humanity has to be able to understand it and organize it. Now, these three propositions, they sound obvious to us currently. They were not agreed upon by ancient philosophers. Some people thought, and this was mimicked by a lot of Islamic philosophers, that we lived in a purely chaotic universe. We continuously had these issues.
Notice, however...
Oh my God, am I not actually displaying this on the screen? Here the stream, so... okay, I'm sorry. I'm just checking... live stream to briefly go over content I've created. Able to understand when something miraculous... Okay, I think we're back on track. Pardon me for that hiccup. But yes, these laws were not as obvious as you might think. And if you get down to like the real like we have to have a proof for everything, you can't prove either of these propositions. So if you're a skeptic, you still might be struggling with any of these things. I'm going to continue on.
That David is once again using imprecise language. Since the universe is literally everything, all this means is that learning is possible, we can learn, and it is good to learn. Given that, human beings...
Yeah, that's a mistranslation of the question. Learning presupposes that it is knowledge. He's mangling the argument here. The statement when you replace it with learning is not something that would have been heavily debated over in the ancient world. And so we just kind of come to a straw man here.
Have always believed this and done this, or we'd be extinct. So I think what David is actually referring to is the way we look to the natural world as a reference point to systematically gain knowledge. Unfortunately for David, this was common practice in ancient Greece, hundreds of years before Christianity. David actually vaguely mentions that there were some scientific advancements in ancient Greece, but glosses over that because there was never a scientific revolution there.
He's going to use Greece here as an example of his atheist utopia. Or I know he's going to. He seems like he is. The Greeks weren't atheists. The Greeks weren't seculars. They weren't moderns. People like Aristotle and Plato, who are the first people to describe Aristotle, one of the first people to describe physical laws and the way that we use them going forward. These people, he believed in a god. These people believed in metaphysical reality. If you're going to superimpose the Greeks onto secularism, who's us? Who owns these values? Why are they our values?
As you'll see, that was his biggest mistake in making this argument. Greece fell, Rome fell, and their knowledge was suppressed by Christian tyranny only to resurface and become a vital part of the very same scientific revolution David credits.
Really? We're doing this Christian suppressed Greek knowledge? I don't even know about this. I mean, this has been refuted so many times by credible historians. I wonder why. I don't know. Do I need to go over it here? I mean, I know that Dean Esme and Todd Lewis did a stream on this, and they probably covered some of this stuff. I mean, it's a ridiculous concept. I mean, there was something called the Dark Ages. I'll grant that. I mean, I think the question is, what were the Dark Ages? And that was the fall of the Roman Empire, when you just had massive destruction of cities in the Western Roman Empire. And in that space, there was very poor preservation of ancient manuscripts that weren't directly related to Christianity in the West. However, you go to Byzantium, you go to the Greek world, and there were libraries that preserved many of these works because they were essential to a lot of thought, which was based on Aristotle and Plato still. So this is a lot of this is sort of copied from sort of anti-Catholic Protestant tracts that came out of the 18th century from a lot of people. They're trying to find a way of blaming the lapse in European learning on the Roman Catholic Church. So they came up with all these narratives of priests, destroying ancient wisdom, and it's really a lot of BS. Attila the Hun sacking Rome has nothing to do with Christianity. In many ways, the consolidation of Christianity after the Dark Ages was the fulfillment of the main project of the Vatican.
Christianity,
and atheists will admit this if you actually ask them about it, but it doesn't come up in the propaganda.
For causing. You'll see once again that it was Christianity that fought tooth and nail against something that caused greatness, only for Christianity to take all the credit once the greatness was realized. Historically, this has been Christianity's typical MO. Fight a war against progress, lose that war against progress, and when that progress turns out to be a good thing after all, claim credit for that progress.
He's also missing the part funding that progress, creating institutions like universities that facilitate that progress. I mean, we're just going through this.
David makes his case for Christianity being the cause of the scientific revolution by pointing out that all of the scientists at that time were Christians. And to find out why they devoted their lives to understanding the universe, he provides various quotes from those scientists. This is a very flawed way to present the argument.
Why?
To truly understand why the scientific revolution happened, it requires an extensive study of much more than the scientists themselves, but rather what was going on in that region politically, socially, philosophically, technologically, and yes, religiously.
I mean, what was going on in this region was, this is sort of a misnomer too. I'm sure he's going to bring up 1500 as the real turning point in Western civilization. Really, the real turning point was 1000. After 1000, that's where you get the creation of these big cities like Cologne and Paris and later Vienna and Berlin. The cities that would, and Florence became a big deal. These were the cities that became the basis for the scientific revolution. And they came about because Christianity had finally consolidated its power in Europe, and it was no longer fighting, to a certain degree, it was no longer fighting a lot of these pagan invaders like the Vikings, and you could have growth.
So let's save the scientists for the end and dig into what actually caused the scientific revolution in the first place. Why were Christians the pioneers of the scientific revolution? David is more than happy to answer for we atheists by saying, atheists often insist that it was just dumb luck. Anyone could have done it, and if Europe had been filled with atheists, it would have happened even faster. As you will see, however, luck more aptly describes David's explanation. He goes on to note that there were cultures and civilizations around the world that had the opportunity to study astronomy, physics, chemistry, and biology, but these branches of science all took off at roughly the same time in one particular civilization. When we investigate why this is so, David says, what we find is people who believe that the universe is intelligible because of their theistic beliefs, that they're rational because...
Okay, I'm going to pause it here. What the fuck? I'm sorry, swearing. What the fuck? You have to label your axes. Your axes. Where are your axes on this graph? Everybody who's ever gone through college knows you can't present a graph with no axes. What are we measuring on the y-axis? I mean, it's obvious the x-axis is time, right? Okay, time and science-y stuff. I mean, how is that measured? What are the units? You know, well, let's call the units Nyeisms, right? After Bill Nye, right? Just how sciencey things are, right? So you know, we got one Bill Nye at year one, and it kind of carries over, and then all of a sudden we start accumulating sciencey Bill Nyes in the year 1500. I mean, this is ridiculous. We lose all of the progress that we got in engineering through 1,000 years of human history, right? We don't. Okay, obviously, if we start at year one, we don't measure any of the adoptions we get in the early Roman Empire. I mean, obviously, this is a little bit after Archimedes, but similar thinkers are around, Galen at that time. So none of that's measured. None of the engineering achievements measured from 1000 onward. We're apparently not measuring this.
As you will.
Suddenly we start gaining our Nyeisms in year 1500. Pulled out of a hat. I guess it's because the Reformation or whatever. And this would again indicate sort of that he's repeating, sort of Protestant tracks, right? I mean, 1500. The only thing I can think of as being relevant there is the Reformation. We have the printing press a little bit earlier. We have the mainstay of the scientific revolution a little bit after, and that's the year they pick. Looks like I got a super chat. So I'm going to take a pause here and answer this question. Okay, apologize to breaking the flow, but thank you very much to Perennial Plant Yaman. So I guess we'll just do a little bit of a coda here. Was World War I the worst war in history? It maimed Christendom. It gave birth to Bolshevism and Leninism. It led to fascism and Nazism, and Europe's best and brightest. Yes, I think... It was the worst war in history. I don't know if we'll ever know that question because we just don't have perspectives. We don't actually know what it was like to live through the 30 Years' War in the same way that we know what it was like to live through the First World War. We don't know what civilization would have come had the 30 Years' War not happened. That's the question I honestly wonder. What if we hadn't had a huge war that tore Europe apart due to the Reformation? I mean, to a large degree, now I'll disagree here, and you'll have to take my word for it, but the scientific revolution that he's going to reference here was well underway by the time the Reformation started. And it would be an open question what would have happened if Europe had been unified, if it hadn't been tearing itself apart in wars. But to get back to the questioners, the super chat Perennial Plants question, World War I it's the direct cause of all of the difficulties we're having right now. With what people call cultural Marxism, what's generally perceived accurately, I think, as the West's decline in confidence, what we see as the general decline in our ability to produce art that's actually beautiful. It was all essentially gunned out of the West at the Somme. That was the moment at which European man looked at himself and said, I am not worthy of actually being proud of my civilization. And, of course it didn't happen immediately, right? But that's where it started. And it's not coincidental that this is also where communism really started to gain a foothold and where you really have the academy itself dominated either by Marxism or by some type of Marxist influenced thought. Because this was really the ideology that came in to fill the gap. Now, there's other ideologies that came in to fill the gaps too that were discarded after World War II because they were associated with fascism. But really, this is where our thought became dominated with Marxist ideas on what was wrong with Europe and lost any ability to defend itself. And again, we lost an entire generation of people who would have been upstanding fathers, who would have inculcated a sense of civilizational pride in the next generation. And we really never gained back that generation. We never really experienced it. But okay, because I know that I'm taking a big digression here. I will add one caveat in. The problems that led to the Somme and the other great battles where Europe's generations just were run onto machine gun nests. These were problems that existed prior to World War One. It wasn't World War One was not the original vampire, and in many ways, World War One could not have happened if Europe had been in a healthier state. The leaders and the military generals that engaged in this campaign, they sent an entire generation to their deaths for functionally nothing. For empires that they could never have maintained going forward into the future. And that's not a sign of a completely healthy civilization. So let's not idealize the Victorian age, right? We need to see the Victorian age as the people who brought about World War One in a very real way. The people who came after them, like the Virginia Woolf and these other people like Hermann Hesse, they weren't completely wrong about that. So World War One was the turning point, but we shouldn't kid ourselves about the manifest lurking poison that was really manifest when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. But thank you very much for the question. If I don't keep on going, I'm going to completely lose track of the mainstay. Again, thanks for that very generous super chat.
God is rational, and they were made in the image of God. So, by setting out to understand it, they're worshiping God. Bam! Christianity gets the credit for science. Case closed.
Yeah.
Right?
Again, we don't have an axis. All we're measuring is niisms. We're not measuring progress because we don't have any units on the y-axis. And of course, we've ignored all the scientific achievements that were gained during the early Roman era and during the early medieval period.
Not so fast. Let's take off our God goggles and look at what actually happened.
God goggles, that's a good one. Good one. I bet he patted himself on the back for thinking of that one.
First, let's clear atheists of the incompetence David implies. He boasts about how it was Christians, not atheists, who began the scientific revolution. David's argument is a classic supremacist argument. One of the reasons...
Supremacist. I think it's called everybody a supremacist who you don't like. You know, it's a great word, right? Like you know, if I don't like progressives, I'll just call them liberal supremacists. Yeah, you're liberal supremacism. That's great. Oh yeah. You like Mexican food. You're a taco supremacist. Okay, great. I love that word. I really want to do a series called Magical Words where we just go over all these little buzzwords progressives use to indicate, their virtue. Supremacy has got to be on there, right? So
supremacist arguments are so bad is that they usually don't account for oppression as a variable.
Well, that was double whammy. Oppression is a variable. Oh, what are we going to measure that one? Okay, so scientific progress can be measured in niisms. Let's measure oppression variable. Well, maybe he'll give a variable, but if he doesn't give a variable, let's call that Sarkeesians, right? So the question is exactly what's our ni to Sarkeesian ratio here, right? I mean that's the real thing, right? Because how many niisms can we generate per Sarkeesianisms we suffer, right? So, if I suffer 3 Sarkeesianisms, right, and I generate just one niism, I still got like a good ratio there, right? We got to take that into account.
He's boasting about the accomplishments of his group, the oppressor, over the lack of accomplishments of the oppressed group, the atheists, who...
Oh my God, I didn't know this. This is pure Marxist history. I mean, I was actually expecting something more like TJ, the Amazing Atheist, or Sargon. This is just a repeat of. I mean, this is Marxism. People who maybe are always not a communist, he doesn't believe in state control of industry. This is actually what people mean when they say cultural Marxism, and it's the reason why we associate modern SJWs with Marxism, even though they're not literal Communist Party members. And it's this idea that you can understand history by dividing history into oppressors and oppressed. This was the functional mechanism that Marx had for understanding history. He used class struggle. Here, he's using atheism. And feminism would use women, right? They would say that women were the oppressed class, therefore, if we didn't have patriarchy, we would have had a scientific revolution in 2000 BC. You can just say that, right? Because, oh, look, all the inventors are men. That's because they were the oppressors.
Would have been burned at the stake back then. This is adding insult to injury. Of course, his group accomplished more than the groups they were oppressing. What else would we expect? Now that the
So, I mean, this also imagines that Christians were oppressing all of the non-theistic religions, like Buddhism, thousands of miles away, right? I mean, this doesn't explain anything about why European civilization would have taken this step, but...
variable of oppression has been affected, however, and the playing field is more even. Can we still say that is so? No.
The playing field is even when we have cultural dominance of my group, right? This is always the thing, right? You know, the playing field is even in any place where we dominate. And this is why the oppression metric is so useless, right? Because eventually when the communists or Marxists take power in a university or in any institution or in a government, right, they'll have to establish a government. And that government will be comprised of people who speak on the behalf of the oppressed. And suddenly the people with the power are oppressed. And so that's why you have, like, you know, more women in college, but are women now oppressive in college? Well, of course not, because their dominance is earned. And it's really nothing more than an argument from one. I mean, it basically is sort of it's almost a nationalist argument. I mean, it selects one group and says everything that you didn't do in history, it's because someone was oppressing you, but everything you achieved was your own making, right? So, you know, the dominance of Christians in the universities were in the 18th century, right, was due to the fact that they were atheists were oppressed. You know, even though, you know, David Hume existed, but the presence of atheists in the universities because we've got an even playing field. How do I know we've got an even playing field? Well, it's because more of my group is in the university. Completely self-referential.
Of course not. If we look at our top scientists now, they're mostly atheists.
Yeah, we know that it's an even playing field because they're mostly atheists, and it's an even playing field because they're mostly atheists. Self-referential.
That's true even in the United States, where atheists are still a tiny minority. Let that sink in. As soon as you're no longer allowed to kill this tiny minority, suddenly that same tiny minority becomes the majority of your top minds.
You'd also see this from a number of things too, right? I mean, the culture in the university itself is a non-believing culture. So, and also a lot of the people he showed aren't atheists. They were agnostics or light deists. He's now expanded atheism to include basically anyone who isn't a Christian. So where we're kind of playing games here, right? I mean, and you know, atheism hasn't, you know, throughout the scientific revolution, you weren't executed for being an atheist. So is that revisionist history too?
Very telling, isn't it? Maybe theists should have tried listening to us rather than killing us and censoring us. David's argument doesn't even make sense from a logical standpoint. The scientific revolution happened suddenly and proceeded very quickly. As the influential
do you know anyone where he got those dates? I mean, they're pretty... Maybe he's talking about Galileo to Newton? I'm just guessing, but...
Historian, physicist, and philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn pointed out, scientific progress is based on paradigm shifts, which is what causes scientific revolutions in the first place. During the Copernican scientific revolution, however, Christianity was already a 1,500-year-old established norm.
Yep, no paradigm shifts in there. no developments in our understanding of how logic worked, no understandings in how our idea of reality worked. Thomas Aquinas never existed. Galen never existed. None of the late Romans ever existed.
When a paradigm shift occurs, we simply do not look to a 1,500-year-old cultural norm as the cause. As the question quickly arises, why did this widespread, brutally enforced, ancient cultural norm called Christianity fail to produce anything like a scientific revolution for 1,500 years, the first full 75% of its entire existence, only to then spontaneously, simultaneously inspire a bunch of scientists to trigger the scientific revolution?
Oh, God, this is getting boring. I've already answered this objection.
No, I couldn't find any historian who believes that. David's explanation is more luck-based.
By the way, you'll find numerous historians that will say that Christianity was a major impetus and starter of the scientific revolution.
Than anything history has to tell us. To find the real answer, we need to look at what changed, not at what stayed the same. As it just so happens, that era was filled with change. After Rome fell, ancient Greek philosophy, science, literature, and politics, which heavily influence Western culture today, were largely lost.
By the way, people who do not know the history of Rome, all of the developments in Rome came really early, around Jesus' time. A little bit before, a little bit afterwards. The stagnation that's kicked in culturally around after the Trajan emperors was massive. You can even look at statues, and the decline in quality was massive, right? So this is something that I'm sure he's not gonna mention that, right? He's gonna act like the decline kicked in as soon as Christianity consolidated some kind of majority in southern Italy, but whatever.
This knowledge was discovered by the Arabs, who translated and preserved the knowledge in Arabic. It's no coincidence.
This is highly over. There were preservations of some of the ancient Greek texts in the Arabic world. A lot of it also was Byzantium. But you can't mention Byzantium in the Eastern Roman Empire because that would destroy your narrative of an ignorant period between 500 AD and 1000 AD. We can't have that, right? So we're writing the Byzantines out of history, right? And largely this is what Islamic history does too. I mean, a lot of their contributions were building off of Byzantine contributions as well, but they don't exist, right? I mean, Turkey has succeeded in erasing them as a quantity, and so we can just include them in part of the Islamic world.
That many Muslims claim Islam is responsible for the creation of science, just as David claims Christianity is responsible. Guess why? While the Islamic world did produce some scientific advancements during its golden age, that came to an end as Mongols invaded around the exact same time ancient Greek knowledge was finally rediscovered by Europeans.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like invasions have more to do with the loss of knowledge than actually religion. I mean, the Mongols didn't change the religion of the area. I mean, the Mongols was at 1200, right? The Muslim world was a supreme force, a supreme military force in the era well into the 18th century. But why did their scientific development suddenly drop off? Well, I mean, it had something to do with the Mongols. Nothing to do with religion. The Mongols burned down Baghdad. And that was the epicenter of Arabic development of knowledge. Now, to a large degree, I speculate myself that a lot of these developments that the Islamic world came up with was due to taking Zoroastrian, Greek, and Christian knowledge and then combining it with Hindu and Chinese knowledge. Hence why Baghdad was such an ideal place, right? If you're the Caliph of Baghdad, you can stick a bunch of Hindus and a bunch of Armenians and a bunch of Greeks and a bunch of Persians in a room together, probably about one or two of them as a Muslim among the bunch, and you get all these great discoveries because they're essentially combining the knowledge. And I mean, the perfect example of this, right, is the introduction of quote-unquote Arabic numerals. I mean, they're Hindu in origin, right? But if you write Greek mathematics in Hindu numerals, you get this awesome thing called algebra. And that's where you get all these massive developments in the Arabic world. Now, I mean, I don't want to rob it. The combination is itself an achievement. And no one should put that down. But again, nothing to do with religion.
Who translated it from Arabic to Latin and introduced it to Europe during the 12th century, which, as any historian will tell you, was the reason for a major turning point in history.
A major turning point in history in the 13th and 12th century, but dark matter, your graph had all the knives going up in the 15th century, with absolutely no scientific development during that time. So where the hell was this? Again, he's just contradicting himself. I mean, there were developments in mathematics during this time, quite clearly not present on the graph, right? I wonder how the oppression points stack up, right? Were the Muslims or the Christians oppressed during this time? Like, I don't know. Well, we'll just keep on going. I'm almost getting bored of this.
This was something new to them, something different, something we can look to as a reason for a paradigm shift, precisely what is necessary for a scientific revolution. The recovery of ancient Greek philosophy culminated during the 13th century, coinciding perfectly with the Renaissance.
Now we have 4 paradigm shifts. Wonder why we didn't mention that before, or actually reflected on the graph.
Subsequent science.
I guess they were the kind of paradigm shifts that didn't generate nihilisms, right? You don't get to the sciencey stuff until you actually can have a good narrative about how something was suppressed by the evil church.
Scientific revolution, a much more narrow timeline than the 1500 years Christianity had to allegedly inspire this sudden change. On the contrary, rather than inspire the scientific revolution, Christianity delayed it. Aristotle had views that were deemed incompatible with Christian belief. He did not believe in divine intervention, but determinism. He also
He believed in a God, though. He actually even offered proofs for the existence of God. Not on this dossier. Kind of left that one out. And this is also it's 400 years before Christianity, before Christ. Not even before the ascendancy. It's 800 years before any consolidated Christian groups even emerged on Europe. So, an interesting person to start with.
Believed not in divine revelation, but rather that knowledge could only be gained through direct observation and reasoning. That sounds a lot like science.
No. Aristotle wrote about metaphysics. Metaphysics is not science. So, again, now we're subsuming. Now, Aristotle, I mean, his work cannot be understated. He is, if you're a Westerner, you have to acknowledge Aristotle as the father of Western thought. In a large way, he's one of the main contributors, and he's the reason why we're searching for physical laws in a really big way. But to say that Aristotle was a scientist because he can fish out a few things that he did, and he didn't make any other contributions in metaphysics or ethics, is ridiculous. And that's what this would require to be true.
Doesn't it? Heretics during the 12th century were put to death, so the church certainly didn't approve of teaching unaltered Aristotelian philosophy. Thomas Aquinas, most notably, recognized value in Aristotle and
now we're getting somewhere.
Worked to reconcile Aristotle's work with Christian theology, modifying what he could, and eventually helped convince the church that they were compatible. After that, Greek philosophy was allowed to be taught at universities and became standard. This did not happen as quickly as it would today.
I believe that Platonism was taught before that. Platonism was a large part of Christian education in the East. I'd have to learn a little bit more about this. David Bentley Hart, he's a classicist. He's done quite a bit on this. He's a good read. I should put a few other people as recommendations for this.
Material back then was very time-consuming and expensive to create. As we trace back the roots of what we call Western civilization today, however, we would be remiss to claim that we only took the good and left the bad. Unfortunately, Aristotle used his ideas about natural law to justify slavery, and Thomas Aquinas found validity in those ideas, preserving them in the Christian tradition, which wasn't difficult to do with...
So you mean the scientific Aristotle? Oh, he was he argued for slavery, but he was the first scientist. Does that mean that now science owns slavery? Well, of course it doesn't, right? Because slavery is bad and science is good, and if it's a bad thing, then it can't be part of our values. I mean, this is the difficulty, right? And this is sort of the trick you do in progressive history and in Marxist history generally, right? You retroactively identify what's good, and then you make your group the set of all people who believed good things. Now, this is very dangerous because it creates. I mean, if I'm a Christian, right? I identify as a Christian or a Catholic. I have to own the fact that my group did some shitty things to people. Now, I can and I do believe to a certain extent that Catholicism did the best it could with the times it was given, and despite the fact that there were numerous really, really evil popes and numerous really, really evil Catholics, that overall the church was a force of good. I have to believe that. But if you're like Dark Matter, the us of the our values is just every person who believed in good things. So as you look through history, everyone who was oppressed and everyone who did good things is part of your group. I'm part of the group of people who were oppressed and only wanted to do good, but we couldn't do good because we were being oppressed. That view of history, and it's encouraged by Marxism, and it's the most dangerous thing about Marxism. It essentially means you never have to be sorry. You never have to be sorry because your philosophy is the one that weaves itself throughout history and is responsible for all of the good things and none of the bad things. And so you must be one of the good people. You never have to own anything. This is really, really dangerous. I mean, if you're going to be part of some collective R or us, you better be part of something that actually owns up to when you made a mistake. Aristotle thought slavery was permitted. Thomas Aquinas thought slavery was permitted. I tend to think that there's caveats that explain this, that explain the mistake away. I think it's a mistake. It's part of history. It's part of my history. I have to own it. If you're a Marxist, you never have to own anything.
Tacit approval in the form of rules for the practice coming from both the Old and New Testaments. Approval of slavery eventually became a blight on the rise of America. So while many American values, including the structure of our government, were inspired by ancient Greece and Rome,
$10 says this guy does not mention Christian abolitionists.
For the betterment of society, we absolutely had to have the will to override some of those values, like the approval of slavery. Let us also not forget that the ancient Greeks and Romans persecuted atheists as well. Not that anyone from their era...
Oh my god, you mean that they were part of the oppressor class too? But I thought they came up with all the good knowledge. I guess the good people who invented the knowledge weren't the people oppressing the atheists because they were good oppressed people.
...was quick to volunteer their thoughts about the non-existence of deities. No, the charge of atheism was more commonly used as an accusation to rid oneself of their enemies. The ultimate irony is that early Christians were killed under the charge of atheism for rejecting the existence and power of the state-sponsored gods of Rome, which is another unfortunate disease that...
Does that make them part of the oppressed class? Obviously it doesn't. This is even more ridiculous, right? Now because Christians were being oppressed and they did good things, they become part of the us category. I'm sure he's going to bring up Galileo too. I mean, maybe he doesn't, but if he does, Galileo was a Catholic. He was devout. He encouraged his children to join the sisterhood. His portrayal as an atheist in history is completely backcasting. But again, if you curve your ideology, the history here is being formed by ideology. We're not accepting any nuance because we're not trying to get nuance. We're trying to get an oppression narrative.
Carried over into Christianity, the persecution of atheists, and the toxic mingling of government and religion.
Oh, it's like toxic masculinity.
A thing the founding fathers of America were at least wise enough to reject from the very beginning, thereby working against nearly half of the 10 Commandments.
Oh, good Lord. Oh, God, this is really pleb here. I don't even want to refute this. I mean, if you think the founding fathers were all secular atheists of the freedom from religion and variety, you need to read more.
the most unique and foremost of our values, those that protect our freedom of speech, religion, press, and assembly, are absent throughout the vast majority of a Christian history that often enforced the very opposite of our values as Americans.
Oh, we don't have modern values in ancient times?
So, a couple hundred years before the scientific revolution, we have ancient Greek knowledge being widely disseminated into the universities. While universities did evolve from theological studies, their utility wasn't realized by the secular world until the recovery of Greek philosophy.
Wasn't realized by the secular world? Where was the secular world in 1300? Who is he talking about? The secular world? Does he mean everyone who wasn't literally part of the church? But they were all devout Christians. I don't know. There's only 20 more minutes of this. Oh my God. This gets better, Chad, right? I don't want to.
Not until that secular utilitarianism did we start to see rapid progress. It's important to note that there have been geniuses all throughout history within Christianity and beyond. So why could none of them accomplish what the geniuses of the scientific revolution did? Notice that a component of science has still been missing from history up until this point, a component that David did not mention at all: the widespread cooperation and eventual peer review of other scientists. While the term peer review didn't exist until the 20th century, its vital precursor goes back to the exact era of the scientific revolution. We'll see, however, before people could easily study each other's work, geniuses were often separated by hundreds of years and hundreds of miles. So did something happen during that time and place to solve that problem? Yes. The printing press was invented in Europe during the 15th century. After that, books and other mass publications, including new scientific discoveries, weren't so expensive and time-consuming to translate, create, and disseminate. That facility.
Why was this contradicts the whole thing? Why was the printing press invented if there wasn't a scientific revolution already going on? And if cooperation among a large group of people was the only requirement, I got one word for you: China. Oh, I got a better word for you. How about the Empire of the Golden Frickin' Horde? How about Kublai Khan? I mean, Kublai Khan had all the thinkers essentially shipped into one central city, and he produced absolutely nothing in terms of any kind of scientific endeavor. Okay, I don't know. Should I read any of the comments here?
A vast network of geniuses working together, all studying and building off of each other's work relatively quickly like never before. It was like the old world's internet.
He has the turkey in this thing. I'm not so sure how much communication there would have been in that front. And wouldn't that have made the Turkey the most likely location for the scientific revolution? They're the most military powerful.
David totally ignores this crucial factor and instead argues that no, it was a widely established ancient cultural norm that did something it had never done before by suddenly simultaneously causing scientists who just so happened to live in the same time and place where the printing press was invented to spark the scientific revolution. Again, David's argument is,
why didn't Aristotle invent the printing press, man? Why didn't the Greeks invent the printing press? If it was just static since 180.
The one that's based on luck, not mine. It's true that the initial viability of the printing press was due to the demand for Bibles, as such a thing would be in high demand during the brutal reign of the church. But that's a mere credit of logistics, and not a matter of credit for anything philosophical or scientific.
No, because
furthermore,
Greeks didn't have
this
a need to
was a
circulate
period
books.
when explorers were leaving Europe on voyages all over the world for the first time, leading to many discoveries of other cultures and ideas. And when they returned to Europe, they brought knowledge of those cultures and ideas with them. David seems to think that Europe existed in a vacuum during the 15th and 16th centuries, but that is very much not the case. He ironically blames the rest of the world for being ignorant, when in actuality the rest of the world's ideas were converging in Europe at that time and inspiring people in new ways, including contemporary Greek scientists, scholars, artists, and philosophers who were fleeing into Europe as refugees after the Ottoman invasion of Constantinople. Many historians believe this also played an important role in the rise of Renaissance humanism. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to emphasize the importance of ancient Greek influence. As it just so happens, history provides us with a brilliant visual representation of the Greek influence on thought during that time, despite the brutal hold Christianity held upon people back then.
Okay, I'm going to pause here. This is painful. I mean, at some point I don't think we need to think, this is just, it's just basically SJW history, right? Like, oh, we got all of these discoveries from China and Africa, and I don't know. I mean, there's no evidence for any of this. I can just say that again. It's not particularly clever. I have a comment. Do you think Byzantine history is often ignored in history class at all levels? Byzantines preserved a lot, and they had a lot of scientific developments that were carried over from the late antiquity era. Some of them were uniquely Christian. I believe Greek fire was a uniquely Christian invention. I don't think the pagan Romans had it. But at the same time, they weren't great innovators. They weren't known for that. And for a long time, they were a dying empire. I think the main reason why we de-emphasize the Byzantine, or as it's probably more correctly called, the Eastern Roman Empire, is because it's really embarrassing in terms of Islam, right? We have to talk about the Crusades and the conflicts that Christianity had with Islam, where Islam was just strictly the aggressor. So I think it probably has more to do with PC-ness than anything dark matter is related to. Yeah, so I paused the video when I had something clever to say, but if I'm just complaining because it's all the same, I don't know. I have to get through 20 more minutes of this POS, so bear with me. I apologize for being a little more salty here than I usually am.
Science have always had a special relationship, borrowing from each other and inspiring each other. Just before the scientific revolution, which marked a huge shift in science, there was the Renaissance, which marked a huge shift in art. Again, this was no coincidence. So what inspired this sudden shift in art? The rediscovery of ancient Greek civilization, of course. Why is this significant? Because the art of ancient Greece and Rome was actually far more advanced than medieval art, which came many hundreds of years later. We people of modernity aren't accustomed to the past being more advanced than the future, but in many...
Oh, we aren't? Oh my God, DarkMatter2525, go into a cotton-picking modern art gallery. Take the first picture off the wall you see that's a splattered blob of menstrual blood, and hold that up to a Rococo painting of the Last Supper. And you ask me if modern people can't understand a decline in artistic quality over a few hundred years. We have destroyed our artistic ability to produce anything of beauty. And that has nothing to do with any kind of scientific advancement. Now, this is... I'm getting way too salty. I said menstrual blood painting. That actually isn't an exaggeration. I actually saw one of those in a modern art gallery. So I shouldn't... It wasn't meant to be disparaging of... well, actually, it was meant to be disparaging of modern art, but it wasn't meant to be an exaggeration or some kind of misogynistic put down. But at any rate, the decline... Okay, so people who actually look at late Roman Empire art understand that there was a huge decline between the early Augustinian period, Octavian period of Roman art and the later Diocletian period. You can see a steep decline. Now, the art produced in the medieval period was largely produced by people who weren't Roman, who weren't actually descendant from the culture we're depicting here. And the art wasn't actually markedly different than the kind of art you'd see coming out of the late Roman Empire.
aspects of Christianity's brutal reign, that was exactly the case. When you look at ancient Greek art, a tradition that was carried on in ancient Rome as well, you see art that was created using methodology that David falsely accredits to Christianity. This is why Christian medieval art was not realistic, but Greek and Roman art was.
Again, two different periods and two different people. I believe that piece of art comes from Germany or France. People who would have... people don't understand. There was a huge population shift in Europe during the fall of the Roman Empire, after which barbarians that flooded out of basically Germany settled throughout the Roman Empire. These people would have had no contact with earlier forms of Roman art, so it would be like expecting people from Africa to essentially recreate the art of again, the Baroque period, because they happened to be imported from Somalia into Germany and became German. This is, again, it's ignorance of what actually was going on during this period.
Because not only did the Greeks value the natural world, but they knew how to reference it. That was hundreds of years before Christianity, so Christianity cannot be credited with that way of thinking. David's argument was defeated around 2,500 years before he ever uttered it. Look at the artwork the Christian world was producing during the medieval period, from the 5th century, not long after Christianity gained dominance.
Those Byzantine frescoes would not have been markedly different than their ancient equivalents, in terms of realism.
To the 15th century, the century that marks the beginning of the cracks in its foundation. What we have here is 1,000 years of slowed progress, a period during the height of Christian power and influence when scientific, philosophical, technological, and artistic advancements were relatively few and far between.
Oh, by the way, this cover right here, this is from the Book of Kells, which is one of the most beautifully illustrated manuscripts. You won't find a single thing like it in Roman times. And it's not even clear that the technology of this would have existed in Roman times. So the guy isn't even inconsistent. I mean, he's taking this and he's thinking, okay, I'm going to hold this up here, and I'm going to hope my audience is ignorant enough to not know that this is a beautifully illustrated manuscript, something that would not have existed anywhere in the Roman scroll art. And I'm going to hope that you don't understand that what I'm showing you is a magnificent work of art. I'm going to hope that you're just going to see this and look at, Jesus with a mullet and think, oh, look at these cartoonishly ignorant medieval people, and then I'm going to compare it to a statue. I mean, people have been seeing statues as they would have existed in the Greek time. They were painted, and they were painted with faces that looked more or less like this.
They did occur, of course, and we have religion to thank for preserving literacy during that time, but it wasn't anything like the rapidly improving world following that period, spurred on during the Renaissance, after the rediscovery of ancient Greece. Look at the artwork. Look at where our...
Yeah, a good comment in the chat, too. No architecture examples, right? That would have been a good comparison.
Our minds were. Unlike the Greeks and Romans, the Christians were not looking to the natural world for reference, as David claims. They were looking inward to their flawed imaginations. They were obsessed with fantasy realms like heaven and hell, and they ignored the natural world. This is clearly reflected in the primitive, childish, two-dimensional, badly proportioned...
Oh my God. They didn't look to the nature for this.
Artwork that followed the far more advanced artwork of ancient Greece.
Paintings to statues, ladies and gentlemen.
In Rome, fallen and swept into the dustbin of history.
The reason why he's not using paintings for comparison is because a lot of the Greek paintings were two-dimensional and misproportioned as well.
Christian authoritarianism resulted in the censorship and desecration of Greek and Roman statues. They destroyed history because it was contrary to Scripture and their sensitivities, thus prohibiting progress.
Oh, what the hell is he talking about? This is totally... The idea that there was this huge purging of pagan statues, I didn't even list the reason. I guess it's because Christians just hate progress.
When Christianity has unchecked power over government, the results are always Orwellian. When does this period of ignorance end? Not until the Renaissance do you see a lot of history finally picking up where it left off 1,000 years beforehand.
all of these paintings were done either under the monarchies in France or under the northern Italian city-states like Florence or Milan. Does he think that Christianity did not have unfettered reign over these governments?
The visual cue of this manifests in the adoption of Greco-Roman artistic methodology. You can clearly see the change in the artwork, which was quickly followed by the change in the science. Not a coincidence. This was the birth of the Renaissance humanists, when people started looking at the natural world again for reference.
Oh, but suddenly pictures of goddesses and angels, that's historic. They were, the way they painted this painting, they went outside and looked at the east wind, and they saw that the east wind was actually, these angels blowing onto giant clam cells. The only way they could have painted with this is looking at nature,
causing a resurgence of
I'm sorry, guys. I know I'm being really uncharacteristically salty and sarcastic. It's not usually my style, but I don't know. I got 10 requests to do this video, but it just poor fact after poor fact after poor fact after poor fact, and after a while, you can't explain the conceptual reasons for this being wrong. You just have to snark at it anyway. Well, fun fact, if anyone realizes this, if anyone's a fan of the Smashing Pumpkins album, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, it's a combination of this picture of St. Catherine combined with a shepherdess from the 16th century. That's where Billy Corgan got that album cover, but fun fact, totally unrelated.
Realism. David thanks Christianity for this shift in thought. But it's evident that Christianity inspired the exact opposite. For over 1,000 years, inspired people to look to the spiritual world, a make-believe world, for
battles. That was part of the spiritual world.
Knowledge, which is precisely why we did not advance like we did until we gained from classical antiquity a renewed appreciation.
Dark Matter hasn't shown a single pagan painting or fresco. It's all been paintings compared to sculptures. That's it.
For the natural world, the real world, not the spiritual world. And that is what finally ushered in real progress. Think about all that damage religion has done to our basic progress. The next time you want to ask atheists why they talk about God so much. Sure, much of the artwork back then was biblically based, but that was the sanctioned story of the time, and the church was the main entity with the money to commission such work. So that's...
Oh, I just got a super chat from Joe Lohangram. What is your favorite painter? Mine is John William Waterhouse. Oh, he's pretty good. As you probably got from my outro music, I'm a big fan of the Flemish masters, Bruegel and other people like that. They're just really, I really, something very evocative about them. I even really like the Impressionists, like Monet. People say, oh, that was the beginning of the decline of Western art. There's some truth to that. People got tired of the form, they started going to subjectivism, but it's still very profoundly beautiful, and it communicates something spiritual. I probably, this is a really good question. I probably should do a video sometime going over art and art history. One piece of advice, though, if people are interested in studying history in college, don't take history classes, take art history classes, because it's much more useful if you base your understanding of history on physical objects. To me, I learned more history from an art history class than I ever learned from a class, like actual history classes where they just go through names and dates.
Again, a matter of logistics or even indoctrination. We saw the same subject matter during the medieval period, but clearly their techniques, their very way of thinking, changed. And that was definitely not thanks to Christianity, because for 1,500 years, Christianity had its chance. But what about what the scientists of that time actually said? Those damning quotes professing God to be the reason for their inspiration. It would be quite a shocking historical incongruity if they were anything other than Christian. Consider the context of that period. This was the beginning of modern scientific knowledge, before they had very many answers. As I said, after we gained a respectable amount of answers, scientists naturally shifted to atheism. That's because the answers didn't point to God the way everyone...
A respectable number of answers. I guess we got across that 2.5 niism scale, right? We got a sufficient number.
One thought they would. 16th century scientists lived hundreds of years before Darwin, before there was a significantly exhaustive, most highly confirmed theory in science that explains in great detail exactly how human beings came to exist. Before that, we didn't know, and the deliberate design of our bodies seemed perfectly plausible. Putting all that aside, those scientists lived during a time when heretics were put to death. Because of the
most of the people here that he illustrates were independent contributors to theology. I'm thinking of Newton, I'm thinking of Descartes. These people took time out of their study to science to actually write about theology. So the idea that these people were being threatened into contributing to a theological perspective of the universe is bunk.
Their discoveries, as history shows, those scientists walked on a razor's edge between Christian approval and heretical thought, the latter of which caused some of the very same scientists David boasts as devout Christians to be persecuted and censored by the church for wrongthink, as their scientific findings were deemed incompatible with Christian doctrine, no doubt retarding scientific progress. So yes, without Christians...
Just think how many niisms we lost. We could have been a whole 3 nies ahead of where we are right now, guys. I mean, we could have been a whole 3 nies greater and a whole 2 Sarkeesians less oppression if it hadn't been for Christianity.
At the helm, there are very good reasons to believe it would have happened much faster. So what damning quotes did David provide us with from those scientists of hundreds of years ago? Those who study the stars have God for a teacher. Tycho Brahe. Brahe was a Danish nobleman. Our piety
independently wealthy
is the deeper, the greater is our awareness of creation and its grandeur. Since we astronomers are priests of the highest God in regard to the book of nature, it befits us to be thoughtful, not of the glory of our minds, but rather, above all else, of the glory of God. Johannes Kepler. Kepler was the imperial mathematician to Rudolf II, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and his grandfather was Lord Mayor of Wilderstadt.
What does this say about anything? He's just going to list the titles off? They lived in Christian societies.
I see plainly that the certainty and truth of all knowledge depends uniquely on my awareness of the true God, to such an extent that I was incapable of perfect knowledge about anything else until I became aware of him. René Descartes. Descartes' father was a member of Parliament. There are 2 kinds of people one can call reasonable: those who serve God with all their heart because they know him, and those who seek him with all their heart because they do not know him. Blaise Pascal. Pascal's father was a judge and a member of the nobles of the robe.
What does this even mean? I mean, both these people were famous for their independent contributions to theology.
The vastness, beauty, and orderliness of heavenly bodies, the excellent structure of animals and plants, and other phenomena of nature justly induce an intelligent, unprejudiced observer to conclude a supreme, powerful, just, and good author. Robert Boyle. Boyle's father was the first Earl of Cork. Atheism...
Man, if Dark Matter was half as interested in the fascinating world that these people came from as he was in constructing impression narratives that could, identify him and his friends as part of the good people of history, I think you get a lot more edification out of this whole process. I mean, you look at people from the 18th century, from these ancient time periods, you see people that overcame incredible hardships to study science, and it's really quite inspiring, just to think about the kind of passion they used to pursue these things with. I don't know. it seems so much more interesting and so much. I mean, this just seems squalled. I mean, every time you're hearing this, he's using this voice that makes it sound like he's just kind of like scowling under his breath at all of the people who ever did him wrong.
Is so senseless and odious to mankind that it has never had many professors. Isaac Newton. I actually have something to say about the content of this quote because of its incredible hypocrisy. Isaac Newton, you see, was secretly against the Trinity, yet dared not make his views public. His pride.
Okay, but it does not make you an atheist, and he did write about this. He just didn't publish them widely. So if he had been an atheist, he would have said, I'm an actual secret atheist.
Private writings on the matter safely discovered long after his death. Of course, he knew the limitations the Orthodox Christian view imposed upon his speech. He, of all people, knew that it would have been suicide to openly profess atheism in most cultures, yet he attributes the lack of atheist professors to the senselessness and odiousness of atheism? No. Newton obsessed over alchemy and the Bible, and ironically, if he had limited his studies to such, we wouldn't even know his name today. To know the mighty works of God, to comprehend his wisdom and majesty and power, to appreciate in degree the wonderful workings of his laws, surely all this must be a pleasing and acceptable mode of worship to the Most High, to whom ignorance cannot be more gratifying than knowledge. Nicholas Copernicus. If it is the case that God finds knowledge more gratifying than ignorance, then it forces one to wonder why he plagued all of humankind with death, just because the first people ate from the tree of knowledge.
Wow, Dark Matter sounds really, really bitter about that story that he doesn't believe ever happened. I don't know, I thought that I'd be viewing this and sort of refuting it, and I kind of gave some refutations in the first 5 minutes, but it just feels really sad and dirty. I really feel sorry for DarkMatter2525. I mean, he sounds like someone who's really undergone some hard things in his life.
Nicholas Copernicus, son of a wealthy merchant, was the guy at the very beginning of the scientific revolution. I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use. When I reflect on so many profoundly marvelous things that persons have grasped, sought, and done, I recognize even more clearly that human intelligence is a work of God, and one of the most excellent. Galileo Galilei. Unlike the limited knowledge available to Galileo during the 17th century, we people of the 21st century are privileged to understand quite well how human intelligence evolved naturally. Notice that throughout these quotes, I've included the connections these illustrious scientists had with the aristocracy. This is important to note because there were many peasant uprisings going on all over Europe at that time, making the upper class very nervous. This
is interesting.
Aristocracy supported a more authoritarian church in order to help keep the peasants in check. These scientists were caught between a...
I mean, was Dark Matter 2525 expecting the scientists to come from, like, the illiterate peasant class? I mean, how would that even be possible?
Rock in a hard place. Not only did they have to worry about the peasant uprisings, but they had to worry about persecution from the church because of their scientific findings being deemed heretical.
What can I say? Marxist history. I mean, I don't know. I'm saying Marxist history. I explain this. I mean, if you're just entering it, I'm sure he's not a communist. But this explanation of everything through power dynamics and oppressor and oppressed dynamics, it's straight from dialectic materialism.
Of course, I'm not saying they were secret atheists, but they had everything to lose and nothing to gain by deviating from the norm and failing to declare that their work was in devotion to God.
So he's kind of saying they were secret atheists. And this is sort of the thing. I'm not saying that you beat your wife. I'm just saying, it's kind of odd how mean you are to her. This is sort of like the classic passive-aggressive way to make an accusation, is to say I'm not making the accusation and then to insinuate it.
In other words, they had no choice but to profusely pander to the church, especially if they wanted to continue their research unmolested. Those scientists...
Wasn't Newton a great counterexample of that?
Definitely did not have the leeway to deviate.
Okay. Bruno was not burned at the stake for his work on science. He was burned at the stake for promoting witchcraft and promoting mysticism. Essentially, the very kind of hucksterism that skeptics are so proud about debunking in the modern world. People who sell snake oil, people who sell false cures. This is ridiculous. The idea that we can take this person and superimpose him as a martyr for science, I don't know.
Allow their scientific findings to cast any sort of doubt, at least not publicly. And that is hardly something about which David should be boasting from the comfort of a country that values freedom of religion, one of our most important values, a value that was,
unless you're a cake baker,
violently opposed by Christianity all throughout its history, and certainly opposed by the Bible itself. Note that Galileo, the father of modern science, was censored by the church and held captive under permanent house arrest and threatened with execution for the charge of, and I quote, following the position of Copernicus, which is thought crime. Rest assured that the church finally apologized to Galileo when I was in high school in 1992.
I mean, okay, this is sort of this ridiculous thing where we ask institutions to apologize for things that happened 500 years ago. We frequently censor people who we think are wrong in our present age. We're currently in the process of doing this. Is the government going to give an apology for this when it discovers it's wrong? No, it's not. This happens all the time. It happened in communist countries. It happened for secular reasons. But the Catholic Church is the one organization that has to systematically apologize for malfeasance. I even wonder what the hell is the point of all of these apologies, right? I mean, at the point we are right now, where we're considering going back and apologizing for fighting back against Islamic invasions of Europe. Like, people have talked about how the Poles should apologize for pushing back against the Turkish invasion of their territories. I mean, this is sort of this progressive obsession with going to old institutions and sort of extracting measures of contrition for them. I mean, there's probably some idea here that I could elaborate on and talk about more, but I don't know. I'm just going to get through this video.
359 years after condemning him. Better late than never. But how could Copernicus be so damned? He was the guy at the very beginning of this revolution. David claimed him as a devout Christian, vital to modern science. So how could it possibly be a crime, punishable with lifelong incarceration and possibly even death, to merely follow the position of Copernicus? David proclaimed that Copernicus's reasons for doing his scientific studies involved his desires to know and comprehend the works of God, and that he believed those studies to be a form of worship. That doesn't sound like a guy the church should be suppressing. David said, and I quote, sounds like his scientific research was grounded in his religious beliefs. Wrong. The motive for his research may have been grounded in his religious beliefs, if you believe he wasn't pandering to the church for his very life, but his actual research was grounded in scientific methodology, which is completely absent from Scripture. And
now, this is something that people might not realize, but a lot of the church's opposition to heliocentrism was, in some sense, scientific. And okay, how is that possibly the case, right? As opposed to all the other things I've mentioned, heliocentrism is something that Europe was manifestly behind all the other civilizations. India knew that heliocentrism was the case. China did. And that's because heliocentrism makes your star maps move better. It explains the motion of the stars. It explains the pattern of the seasons a lot better than does geocentrism. There's one thing, though, that heliocentrism does not explain until you get things like Newton. And that is physics. Because we were operating under Aristotle. And Aristotle had this idea of, motion coming to a stop, right? He said, objects in motion naturally come to a stop. And this is the physics of Aristotle. It's totally incorrect before Newton's inertia, right? So if something is moving and you're on the moving object, you fly right off of it, right? Because your nature is to come to a stop and the object is moving. So how do we know that the Earth isn't moving? Well, the mountains don't fly right off of it, right? The seas don't suddenly just go flying off into space. And the view of heliocentrism could not be reconciled with our understanding of how physics worked. And for that reason, it was resisted. But the resistance of adopting heliocentrism for this reason actually resulted in quite good effect, because once we actually adopted heliocentrism, it called out for an explanation of why the motion, the bodies on Earth move differently than they did in the heavens. And this is the direct impetus for discovering the Newtonian laws of motion. And and China nor India had these advanced concepts of physics, and what led them to adopt heliocentrism much faster. It also made it so they didn't ask the questions they needed to ask once they actually adopted the theory.
The objectivity of that methodology is utterly immune to anyone's motives. You can use the scientific method to create a nuclear bomb, for instance, or you can use it to create better crops to feed the starving. In other words, the answer is the answer, regardless of why you decided to seek the answer in the first place. Just as telling, however, is the fact that David mentions nothing of Copernicus's most influential detractors, famous theists who derived most of their arguments against Copernicus not from scientific methodology, but from Scripture. They included John Calvin, Martin Luther, Philip Melanchthon, Nicholas Serrarius, and Francesco Ingoli. So let's be clear. Even in the midst of the Protestant Reformation, there were influential Christians on both sides, united in their condemnation of Copernicus.
Oh my God, there was disagreement, guys. That's amazing.
The Catholic Church actively suppressed Copernicus's work, removed and altered passages of it because it was, quote, contrary to Holy Scripture, and they didn't want it to, quote, creep any further to the prejudice of Catholic truth. 400 years later, David Wood comes along on YouTube and says, we have Christianity to thank for Copernicus's discoveries. Yet when we look beyond the surface-level thinking, look beyond the snippet of a quote, and as we actually do the work and delve into the history, what we actually find is a great swath of influential Christians fighting tooth and nail against the very progress that Christians will eventually claim credit for after the truth of the matter becomes apparent. Christianity fights and fights and fights, and when it finally loses, it pretends the fight never took place and then plagiarizes the winner.
That's not bitter. Oh God, I don't know. The critique of this really did not change. I feel like it's kind of coming to an end.
If the findings of those scientists reaffirmed Christian truth, they would not have been so thoroughly persecuted from every corner of Christendom. The reason they were persecuted is because the implications of their scientific findings were contrary to Christian belief.
Well, how is that possible when you admitted that the Greeks persecuted atheists too? Good Lord.
At least until the apologists could figure out some mental gymnastics that would make them acceptable, a long-standing Christian tradition. I'm actually glad that they were there to find the loopholes that stopped Christians from suppressing science. In that regard, even we atheists owe those apologists our gratitude. The bulk of Christianity, however, believed that if those new ideas about the universe were accepted and disseminated, it would mean that their religion would lose influence. And they were right, because that...
Oh my God. Well, I mean, not really, because Christianity was really reaching the height of its fervor at the same time of the scientific revolution. People are unaware, but there's oscillations in religiosity, even in the Middle Ages. You know, there were more secular ages, there were more religiously based ones, and I'm afraid that the 16th century was a highly religious age, and that continued on well into the 19th century. I mean, the advent and discovery of science, it really did not have any noticeable effect on religion until the 19th century, until industrialization.
That is exactly what happened. Their fears were justified. The truth will out. Their brutal dominance was righteously sacrificed for a better, more prosperous, less authoritarian world. We need to do everything we can to maintain that
unless you happen to live under communism. In that case, secularism did not lead to a less authoritarian world.
Direction. A surefire way to ruin our wonderful progress would be to indulge in a misguided Christian revival to combat Islam. Secularism is the answer to Islam. Both Christianity and Islam are ancient Middle Eastern Abrahamic religions. No matter how different they may seem to you, their DNA is identical, and their histories are both brutally oppressive. Either one is more than capable of throwing us all into limbo for 1,000 years. So let's not play with fire and figure out an intelligent and peaceful way to deal with Islam while preserving the freedoms and rights we have and striving to gain them for those who do not.
So, oh, good Lord, where do you end with this video? I mean, it's wishful thinking. It didn't provide any answers. I kind of knew that on the outset. What people mean when they mean is Christianity an answer to Islam? I really don't think that people are going to adopt Christianity and Islam's going to magically go away. I think that anyone who looks out in the world today, or anyone who looks at demographic statistics, understands that Islam is a growing civilizational and demographic force in the world. They have had technology, they have had science for 200 years now. It hasn't put a dent in their belief in any number of doctrines that we hold, their doctrine of expansion. So the West is either going to have to get over itself, it's going to have to get some understanding of metaphysics, get some understanding of objective justice, it's going to have to start believing in itself again, or it's just going to be subsumed under an expansionistic Islamic world. Demographically, if not otherwise. I mean, people like DarkMatter2525, they're more concerned about being on the right side of history than they are actually in stopping this bad future from coming about. I honestly wonder what he thinks. Does he think that we're just going to go back to 1995 if we get rid of? I mean, what religion is he even speaking of right now? Europe is largely secular. Is that safety against Islam? In some sense, it's actually the only countries in Europe that have really pushed back at all about on the current immigration waves have been, well, Poland, which is the most religious European country we have. I mean, this is not a reason to believe in religion. It's not a reason. I definitely do believe that religion is a bulwark against much of sort of the civilizational decline that's leading to Islam, the Islamic expansion in Europe, but it's not an argument for believing it, but it's an argument for sociologically understanding what occurred and not engaging in this ahistorical method where we superimpose our Western notions of rights and freedom onto a medieval world that never, those ideas could never even have been implemented in that world. So I don't know. 40 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. There you go. Oh, and I have another super chat from Vincent Villi. What is your opinion of Orthodox iconography? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I am somebody who comes from an atheist, secularist background. I've always felt very uncomfortable about worshiping in front of icons. It's never come to me naturally, especially relics. It's not really my thing. But I respect them. I respect what they've done for people. I respect the fact that they're part of the faith insofar as they're Catholic. And I admire the craft that goes into Orthodox iconography. And it's part of a beautiful culture that I'll just never be part of. I'll understand it and I'll admire it from afar. I kind of wish I had asked Jonathan Pegau about Orthodox iconography a little bit more. A few weeks ago, I had a conversation with him about culture and just the general Jordan Peterson stuff. And I kind of missed an opportunity to ask him more about Orthodox art. He even runs a journal that talks a lot about Orthodox arts and letters. And I looked at that a little bit. It's really fascinating. I think we need more of this. I think we need more religious examinations of art. Because if Dark Matter is going to go on and on about how Christianity facilitated decline and the artistic output of beauty in the ancient world, oh God, look at the modern art world and tell me if there's not a similar decline going on right now. Because all I just see is a rogues gallery of utter decrepit art. It's worse by 1,000 times than the decline of artistic standards that occurred post the Trajan emperors. We've just lost the ability to find any interest in the human form. We've lost the ability to find any kind of fascination with larger questions of truth. And I mean, maybe I'm doing something similar to DarkMatter2525 when I say I think it's due to secularism. I think once and it doesn't necessarily have to be Christianity, but once you say that there's just no meaning, there's no objective truth, there's no objective beauty in the world, you're going to have an endless procession of Campbell soup cans, framed toilets, used beds that are found art, and giant sharks in formaldehyde. I mean, those are like the 5 most famous pieces of art in the last 40 years. I'm not even joking. Those are all pieces of art that are very famous. Condom-strewn beds and sharks in formaldehyde. So, I don't know, guys. It took me a lot longer to get through that video than I thought. I think I'll just have to put the Noel Plum video off to another day. If people want to ask me some questions, I'd be happy to talk about any subject they want. This is, again, an experiment. I'm trying this video in extemporaneous talk into the camera. Like I said, usually in the past, these distributist answer videos have been things that I've shot and edited and put on the web as completed videos, but I think I'm going to move to a version where I just answer these things extemporaneously. So I guess I'm just going to chat a little bit longer, see if there's any questions for the chat. If you can reply me with a question, I'll know, or even better, super chat it. I'll know where to answer the questions. In the meantime, I'm just going to start talking about content I have coming up. I'm going to try to do some live streams with people. I have a running unpopular opinions thread on Twitter, and I intend to actually do a live stream on that, similar to Academic Agent. Maybe I'll get some people in there. I intend to do another holiday stream. I don't have a topic set aside for that yet. I'm looking for people to give suggestions for a topic. Then I'm also working on another one of those series videos that have kind of become a mainstay of my channel, where I cut like an hour and a half big talk into like 5 videos that are in a series. And this one's going to be on nerd culture and what's wrong with it, and hopefully how we can improve it. Now, I think if you notice all of these sort of series videos I have, they kind of have been more directed towards what's wrong with something and how we can improve it, not just complaining about, oh, progressives own the universities, or oh, the alt-right is racist, or oh, nerd culture is cancerous. When I do this series videos, I kind of hope that I'm being positive. I'm critiquing the alt-right and showing how it could improve. I'm critiquing the state of the modern progressive dominance of institutions and talking about a way that we can push back against them. And I really want the nerd video to be, or the nerd culture or geek culture video to be something similar. Looks like I got some questions here. Will you ever have a conversation with millennial woes? I certainly will. I've been a little bit cautious about my interactions with the alt-right. I think I was considering putting my name in for Millennial 2017. I decided against that because I always kind of want to keep my interactions with the alt-right at arm's length. I am not associated with the alt-right. And whenever you're sort of prominently featured on their channels, the threat of being soundbited and doxxed just goes up exponentially. And it's something that people have to be careful of if they're working in an academic environment. But I definitely want to have millennial woes on to talk about things. Why do you think pantheism tends to lose to monotheism? Do you mean polytheism or pantheism? Because I would say pantheism is just contentless. Pantheism is just like, there's God is everywhere. God is anything. Well, if God is everywhere and God is anything, then God is nowhere and God is nothing. So it communicates no information. It loses. Looks like I got a super chat. I really have to make sure I don't miss these things. Will I ever make an art history series? Oh, I would love to. I don't know if I'm an expert in art history. I'm an engineering student that took 2 art history classes. They were the best units I ever took that were outside of my discipline in terms of my knowledge of history, and I think that I would love to. I would love to. I'd have to research it, Vince and Philly. I'd want to do a good job. I've speculated that I could do a pretty good job just taking sort of periods of art history that I know really well. Like, for instance, I'm a real fan of Southern Gothic in movies and in music and in art in general. And I could do a pretty good series on that, right? But if I were to do art history, I'd have to put some serious research in it. It would be a very worthy effort to do. The vegan moral argument. Okay, the vegan moral argument is I just don't care. If someone asked me to stop eating meat, probably would. What's your favorite era of classical music? My favorite era of classical music is that's not. I don't think it's a really fair question. If you were to ask me about 10 years ago, I'd say the Romantic era. And then I kind of realized that it had a lot of problems with it. I just go by composer. I really love Tchaikovsky. I really, really love Sibelius. Sibelius is one of my favorite composers of all time. I'm quite partial to the early modernists like Rachmaninoff and Stravinsky, and my fiance is obviously she's a huge fan of the French Impressionists. There's a good video to be made about classical music. I'll see if I can get my fiance involved in that. That would be quite useful. Looks like there's another super chat here. Will you and Sargon have part 2 of the stream? The first one was the best colloquy I've ever seen in years. Would you and Sargon discuss Locke's treatises? In Augustine's Confession or the City of God too? Well, you know what? If I were to discuss Sargon's work on Locke, I would definitely have to include Fritz Imperial. As a matter of fact, well, that's kind of unfair to invite Sargon to his stream. You know, Fritz Imperial put a lot of work and did a really good job doing a response video to Sargon's video on Locke, and I would be seriously, I'd seriously be eating his lunch if I did that. So I would either propose him and I do a video with Sargon together, or just have him do it. Augustine's Confessions and City of God would be a really good thing to discuss with Sargon too. The problem is, it's been a really long time since I read Augustine's Confession, and confession here time, I never finished City of God. It's an amazing book. It's an incredibly important book to read for our particular era, because I highly speculate that the disillusionment and the decline that we're seeing right now is something that really has not been observed since the fall of the Roman Empire. And insofar as we're observing and writing about it now, Augustine would probably be the nearest analog we've had in history. So this is an excellent comment. You reminded me that I have to reach out to Sargon. I need to probably I'll bring up the idea of doing a Locke stream and I'll put forward Fritz Imperial's name as someone who might do it just as well as I could. What do you think about Vancouver? Is it similar to Seattle? The weather is similar to Seattle. I find Vancouver to be a nightmare. I think God, I know that my fiance has no love lost for Vancouver, so I could bash it. I think that if you look at a city like Victoria, you see sort of what Vancouver must have been like in an earlier era. Much more centered, much more focused on an older Canadian culture that no longer exists. Right now, Vancouver looks like a bunch of sprawl cities that have been stuck together. The downtown area is dominated by residential suites, and the city has a really distinct lack of character to it. Now, to a large degree, I think the forces that have sort of taken over Vancouver are well at work in Seattle, and we're probably going to find ourselves in a similar situation. But still, I find Vancouver to be a much harder place to find yourself in, if that makes any sense, than in Seattle. Seattle, I know where the downtown is. I know how it's structured. I can walk around it. It feels like there's an area where people live. It feels like there's a culture there still. Not so much with... Oh, I'm sorry. Blackjack, you're right. Yeah. Fritz Imperial's and Sargon's stream was not over Locke, it was over Thomas Paine. I'm sorry, that's a good correction. Well, I mean, you could probably do them together, right? You could probably do both of them together. And I think that insofar as you're talking about the English and Scottish Enlightenment, they are really bookended by those two thinkers. Really by the end of Thomas Paine's career was ended by the French Revolution, and that's really when you get to the statement of the rights of man to their disastrous implementation in the French Revolution. And at that point, you really start about a post-revolutionary European order, and the Enlightenment as it has existed in its early conception really ended. Have I read What's Wrong with the World by G.K. Chesterton? Yes, I have. It's an excellent book. Chesterton is a master of the ending, and the end of What's Wrong with the World is one of my favorite endings of any of his books. It seems to be a stretch to compare the highly fractured late Roman Empire with the modern era. We're not dealing with military coups every couple of years. No, we're dealing with political coups every couple of years. We have two highly contentious political parties that are on the verge of not being able to talk to each other. We are the dominant military force. That is true. There's no military displacing us. Oh man, I don't know. The comparison is a stretch, I agree. I don't know, man. If you're one of those people who can't see the cracks forming in our society, I don't know what to say. I feel that it's just categorical at this stage. I know I'm a pessimist. I know everyone tells me I'm a pessimist. I don't know. To me, I see the cracks coming. Have you read any works by Eric von Coolnet Leyden? No, I haven't. Can someone remind me what works he even did? Let's just look this up briefly. Is he a reactionary? Conservatism. Yeah, I'll have to give him a look. Like Sargon, I have a reading list up to the ceiling. Unlike Sargon, I don't actually make my living off of doing this channel. I have other research to attend to that's nothing to do with this. Okay, well, I think we'll just maybe do another 5 more minutes of questions and then call it night. My voice is kind of giving out, guys. I'd like to do the Noel Plum thing, but we'll have to wait for another night. If people like this format, I'll likely repeat it. I hope it's not too irritating to just hear me lecture into a microphone for an hour and a half. It makes you feel self-conscious. I hope it's edifying to a certain degree. Believe me, watching this video, I was face-palming the entire thing. I was boring myself at the end. And any insight came really, really early on. Would you argue that the decline of Rome began during the period of stability within the Roman Empire? Yeah, I mean, the decline was set up by Augustus, right? Because, once that stability kicked in, the army that it was based on was just sort of atrophying. I mean, this is part of the civilizational cycle. I could probably do a video on that. Oh yeah, Edmund Burke. I'm sure that would come up. Perennial plant. The Edmund Burke, the critiques of the American and French Revolution would certainly, come up. It would have to, I think, right? Because Paine was a big critic of the. I think wasn't Paine a critic of the French Revolution? I mean, he would be in that category of people that were fans of the American and critics of the French, and Burke was one of them too. What's your view of the neo-reactionaries? Neo-reactionaryism isn't altogether right. It is, in my mind, a huge, huge, huge missing piece of the puzzle. The lack of integration of neo-reactionary ideas is why present conservative thought seems so utterly boring. I'm sorry, guys, but I mean, I used to be a conservative of the sort of Federalist National Review variety. It needs to come to terms with some of the big problems in that worldview. And one of the big problems in that worldview is its inability to explain it's the inability to explain Conquest Second Law. It's the inability to explain the natural lapse of all institutions towards becoming more progressive. Conservatism does not have a good explanation of why that occurs. It does not have a good mechanism for pushing back or resisting it. And in the absence of those two examinations, of which neo-reactionary ideas do have an explanation, conservatism of the variety that's currently reigning in the establishment conservative newspapers is going to perennially seen in our present era as an impotent force that can't do anything, either intellectually or politically. Have you read any of the stories of the Father Brown series? And if you have, what is your favorite story that you have read? Father Brown is awesome. My favorite story is The Flying Dagger. Although I feel like when I say that, I probably am forgetting one. To the chat, if you're looking for the alt-right G.K. Chesterton, though, God of the Gong is the most politically incorrect Father Brown short story. Oh, another super chat. Let's have a hangout on the topic of the supernatural. Whoa. That would be interesting. Although, I mean, is this going to be like an atheist topic where we like argue whether it exists, or would it be something like the essence of the supernatural? Because I feel like the latter would be a lot more interesting. Like, take it from like a John Butler Yeats kind of thing, or take it from like a Carl Jung, what's his face? Jordan Peterson angle. Yeah, that would be fun. I think I owe you a hangout for that. And you've reached out to me on a variety of media forums. The best one is always email. The other ones I'll see, and if I don't have time to answer it, I'll forget about it. So email is always good for that. Payne's writes, am I wrong? Was Paine in support of the French Revolution? I thought he turned against it. This is the whole reason why I think Fritz Imperial would be a better choice for Sargon in this particular conversation, because it's been such a long time since I've read Paine or know anything about him. I'd have to do my homework. And for a Sargon stream, I definitely would do my homework. Do you think foreign investment, which is causing... Well, no, foreign investment was definitely the reason why house prices were sky high in Vancouver. The whole city seems like it's a money laundering scheme for the Chinese elite. It's one of the reasons why it's a little bit depressing. And it's a good city, don't get me wrong, but that city needs to sort of stabilize itself a little bit more. And the presence of like a ruling class that is fundamentally Chinese is not helping it seem like a native city. It seems like it's an offshoring program for the Chinese Communist Party. Could you do a video on the difference between Protestants and Catholics' concepts of God? Well, I've been seriously avoiding that for a very, very long time, because I felt like there were a lot of Protestants that watched my channel, and I really did not want to start a Protestant versus Catholic knife fight. Interesting video idea, but kind of at the bottom of my barrel in terms of things that I'm looking to. Oh, talk about another person who I want to do a live stream with, King Crocoduck. Oh, were we going to do a live stream? Shit, I'm sorry, guys. I'm really behind. Thoughts on Hilaire Belloc? Awesome guy from my knowledge. He did a great book on the Great Heresies. He did some good children's books, and he was one of the original distributists. I don't know. I always say, Europe is the faith, but the faith is not Europe. Anyway, guys, my voice is seriously about to take a dive, so I'll take a few more questions. This is really addictive. Maybe I'll just end it. Anyway, guys, since I'm not getting any new questions, I will just end the stream, and thank you guys so much for showing up and listening to me take down this DarkMatter2525 video. It was excruciatingly painful. Maybe I should have done the Noel Plum one instead. That would have, at least Noel Plum is a respectable guy. He's not suffering from deep psychological scars like Dark Matter is. But at any rate, thank you so much for people who ask questions. I will try to get back on that Crocoduck thing. Oh man, I definitely owe him a stream. At any rate, I will wish you guys a pleasant night. Thank you so much for the super chats, and I will see you guys again for the Advent streams, both the unpopular opinions and the as of yet unnamed one. So, great. I'll have to kill this. Have a wonderful evening, and have a wonderful Advent.